Motions and resolutions.
Hollins moves that House File number 4411 be taken from the table.
Representative Hollins.
That is my motion, Madam Chair.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The motion prevails.
Clerk will report the bill.
The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 4411, number 1 on the calendar for today, an act relating to elections, second engrossment.
Okay, so he didn't explain it yesterday. Never. Okay. I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I drew the straw of having my bill come up at 10:30 p.m. on a Friday after a week where we've been here until midnight every night. Members, the election bill is the last thing standing between you and the weekend. Consider that as you calibrate the length of your remarks on this bill. On that note, this bill is 10 pages long and we did not have a huge target, so it should not take long to summarize. The bill supports local election officials through the Voting Operations, Technology, and Elections Resources, or voter account, and ensures open and transparent information on who is influencing our local elections. This bill provides support in multiple areas for our local election officials. It redirects unused and unusable Dropbox funds from 2021 to the voter account and supplements that with additional funding. There are also funds provided to the Secretary of State's office to reimburse local expenses related to claims under the Minnesota Voting Rights Act, where the jurisdiction is actively remedying the violation. The Campaign Finance Board has provided additional funding to notify local governments and update their system to accept disclosures in local spending by political committees and political funds. That's the summary of the bill. We have several amendments, and I look forward to the discussion.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Johnson moves to amend House File number 4411, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A15.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, this is a real simple amendment. It just changes one word. In 2010, this subdivision was added to our election statutes, dealing with the election integrity. But unfortunately, in 2013, one word was changed as well. I'm here to change that back because the election integrity is important. This last 2 elections, I received numerous phone calls and messages from my constituents about the absentee ballot applications being mailed to their parents. The funny part is their parents had been dead for 10 years or longer. They had passed away a decade prior, but they were getting absentee ballot applications in the mail. For some people, it brought up heartbreak, sadness, and they were really wondering about the integrity of our elections. Who's voting? Now, what this does, it changes one word from may, which was the original intent of this subdivision, to shall. What it means is the Secretary of State's office will double check the voter rolls with the Social Security on death records to make sure and remove those who have passed away from our voting rolls to keep our voting rolls accurate, to make sure that the right people are voting. We don't want to be like Chicago, where they talk about when they need ballots, they go to the cemetery. That's not the right way to do it. So, members, I do ask that you support this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Johnson. The Secretary of State's office already does this, so they have no issue with it, and I'd encourage members to vote yes.
There being no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Torkelson moves to amend House Law number 4411, the second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A16.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A very simple amendment before us. There have been a number of changes in the election law both last year and this year, and a lot to incorporate into the system, especially for our local governments. This just delays the effective date of these changes to January 1st, 2025, after the next election, to give them a little more time to adequately address the changes that have been made and to make sure they're done properly and effectively. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I urge a green vote.
Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Lead Torkelson. This seems like a reasonable amendment, and I would encourage members to vote yes.
Further discussion on the amendment? No further discussion. All those in favor of the amendment say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Torkelson moves to amend House Law number 4411, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A18.
Recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. This timely amendment requires candidates to report whether they have been convicted or charged of a crime on their financial reports with the CFP. I believe there are amendments to the amendment, Madam Speaker.
There's an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
Freiberg moves to amend the Torkelson amendment to House File number 4411. The amendment to the amendment is coded A32.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Lead Torkelson, for the amendment. Maybe not quite as brief comments on this one. So the underlying amendment kind of puts the disclosure in a weird place. So candidates have to disclose criminal history in a campaign finance report. The only things required under current law are things like candidate names, treasurer names, the amount of cash on hand, the contributions received, the distributions made, the employer of large contributors. It's not really designed for personal information. That being said, I think it can be tweaked to be workable. It is a little overbroad as it is right now. It requires disclosure not just of convictions, but of any time a person is charged with a crime, even if that charge is dismissed, and it applies to even minor crimes. So this amendment removes the requirement that getting charged has to be disclosed, and it raises the crime level to a felony. I hope this is considered a friendly amendment. I'd be inclined to support the underlying amendment if this were adopted. So I would encourage members to support the secondary amendment.
Discussion to the amendment Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. While this is a bit of a step back, I think it's a reasonable idea, but I do request a roll call on the amendment to the amendment.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Further discussion? There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The chief clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Carroll.
Go ahead.
Carroll, aye.
Carroll, aye. Keel.
Go ahead.
Keel, yes.
A little more volume, can we get?
One more time.
Keel, aye.
Keel, aye. Keeler.
Keeler, aye.
Keeler, aye. Cagle.
All right, go ahead.
Cagle, aye.
Cagle, aye. Pulowski.
Pulowski, aye.
Pulowski, aye. Perez Vega.
Perez Vega, aye.
Perez Vega, aye. Wolgamott.
Wolgamott, no.
Wolgamott, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 96 yeas and 28 nays, the motion prevails and the amendment to the amendment is adopted. To the underlying amendment. Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I urge a green vote on the underlying amendment.
Further discussion to the underlying amendment as amended. Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, members. Please support the amendment.
There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment as amended say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. The amendment as amended is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Quam moves to amend House File Number 4411, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A10.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, this is something I was surprised that it wasn't already law. Basically, it's very common for someone to loan their campaign some money, especially early on. This would just make sure that there wasn't any interest being paid back to the candidate.
Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe there's a secondary amendment.
There's an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
Freiberg moves to amend the Quam amendment to House File Number 4411, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded A22.
Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Quam, for offering this amendment. I think it's a good idea to prohibit interest from being paid on campaign loans. I checked with the director of the Campaign Finance Board. He also felt there was value in the amendment. We both felt that the clawback provision and the retroactivity would be very difficult to administer. Specifically, the director said delaying to 2025 would allow the board to communicate with local filing officers on the change in requirements and start with a clean slate for the local election committees as well. So this amendment to the amendment does two things. It sets an effective date of January 1st, 2025, and it deletes the payback provision, which would be very difficult to administer. I spoke to Representative Quam before this. It sounds like you would consider this a friendly amendment. If this were to go on, I would certainly have no qualms, as it were, about supporting the underlying amendment.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm sort of hurt by that little declawing of my amendment. We were going so well and friendly, but I will submit to, your authority. Thank you. So we can vote green and green.
There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment to the amendment, please say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the amendment to the amendment is adopted. To the underlying amendment. Discussion. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment as amended, please say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the amendment as amended is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. It's going really fast. The clerk will report the amendment.
Altendorf moves to amend House File Number 4411, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A9.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. Chair Freiberg, wow, this is great. You tell everybody we've been here for 5 days till midnight, and look at how we're cooperating and getting along, so let's keep this going. The A9 amendment is very simple, and I think this should get bipartisan support, as I think this is a problem that's happened perhaps in both parties. Really, we just want to make sure when a candidate is running that they are legally a resident of that district. And so this amendment is very simple. When filing for your candidacy, that you show some sort of proof, a driver's license or other form of proof of your residence showing that you are in that district of which you are filing to run for that office.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Altendorf. I'm not sure this is totally necessary. It's already a crime to lie on a candidate registration. It's a sworn document. That being said, I remember during my second term, a House member was found not to be living in the district he was represented, and he was removed from the ballot. So as a result, that district had no representation for a few months. To avoid the risk of that happening, I'm willing to accept this amendment, see if the language might need some tweaking and work in conference, but fine having this go on for now. So I'd encourage members to support it.
Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Freiberg. You all have the benefit of my presence here from that incident. So I support the amendment. It's a good amendment. We often hear about the things that the Secretary of State cannot verify. We should verify. Thank you.
Further discussion. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Altendorf moves to amend House Law number 4411, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A14.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. The A14 amendment, again, is really very straightforward. We want to make sure in the elections process that everyone is feeling very confident in our elections, that they're secure, and that also the people who are eligible to be voting are voting in that election. So the A14 amendment states that it would be a felony if someone who is a non-citizen is attempting to vote in that election, and that also ICE would be notified.
Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Altendorf. I feel a little better having accepted one of your amendments. Unfortunately, this might be the point in the debate where the love fest kind of ends. So I'm going to ask members to vote no on this. The amendment is overbroad. It applies even if somebody doesn't vote. So just to give you an example, suppose in good faith a person thinks they're eligible to vote, they go to a polling place and try to sign in, and then an election judge tells them they're not eligible to vote, and they say, oh, whoops, and they don't actually vote. It was an honest mistake. But they did attempt to vote, and under the language of this amendment, that would make that a felony. And it also removes the requirement that the person will be penalized only if they voted knowing they're not eligible. So as I read it, if they accidentally attempt to vote in the wrong precinct, which is something that happens all the time, they're automatically guilty of a felony. And come to think of it, that's probably a bigger deal. And then regarding the second provision relating to attempts by suspected non-citizens to vote, there's really no standards in place for that. I don't know how it could be determined that a person is suspected of not being a citizen. It seems like it opens the door to potential discrimination. There's no means of tracking or recording who tries to register and why they are not eligible. That could be because of age. It could be because they don't have proof of address. They may not be a citizen. None of these things are inherently wrong, and that's why our election workers are trained to inform people who seek to register of the requirements for eligibility and registration. It would require a large administrative effort to train and implement alongside what gets reported and how. So, members, I'm going to ask you to vote no on this amendment.
Discussion on the amendment. I recognize the member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Freiberg yield?
He will yield. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Freiberg, we are heading into our first general election coming up this coming fall, this November, where people who let's see here. What's the right way to put it? Driver's licenses for all was passed last year, and so we're heading into our first election where that is the law of the land. Can you describe for the body what kind of additional training is taking place to ensure that election judges know if someone is here and who is an eligible person to vote in our elections?
Representative Freiberg.
There's lots of, thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the question, Representative Schultz. Election judges go through all sorts of training. Election laws change all the time. So they will be trained on the new election laws that are in place, including to the extent it's relevant, I'm not sure it is, but the non-compliant IDs.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm glad that I heard from Representative Freiberg there that a little additional training to help us with Representative Altendorf's addition tonight. I'm happy to hear that that's not going to be much of a burden. That will fall right into the training that each of our election judges do this year, and that this is really going to be quite simple for us tonight. That's what I heard. And so I think that this is actually pretty prudent. And I guess my favorite part is how I'm not speaking just for myself here, but for the people in my community and the election judges in my community, because those very people, I love it. Like, they're some of the most passionate people who care about this country and this state so much. They love our Constitution, and they want to ensure that the truth in our elections. And there are instances, my favorite, I'm literally thinking of the conversation I had with one of the election judges in my district who said, yeah, some college students, by the way, there's no colleges or universities in my district, just to clear that up right from the start. But in rural townships in my community on election day, there are some young people who show up to a rural township and they don't happen to be from there. And they show up trying to see if they can make their way in and try to see if they can vote. I do believe that there needs to be some level of enforcement and some level of penalty for people who are trying to influence elections in places that they're not from. I think this is really quite basic. Trying to vote in a place that you're not from, given the other election laws that are already on the books, makes this common sense. There has to be penalties for this sort of thing. And that's why the Representative Altendorf amendment tonight is especially prudent, given the fact that we're already a top 5 destination for people coming here illegally. And there's no doubt about it that people are going to try to vote in our elections that are ineligible to vote. And every single time that that happens, whether in the past or especially as we move forward here, that disenfranchises the voters who are legal residents and legal citizens of this state and of this country. And I will not stand for disenfranchising the voters, the legal citizens and voters of this state. And that's why we should adopt this amendment.
Further discussion. To the author of the amendment, Representative Altendorf.
Yep, Madam Speaker and members, I am going to make a motion to divide this. After line 1.6, as I heard from Chair Freiberg, that it didn't seem like he had any trouble with the second half of this amendment, the non-citizen piece, and there was some questioning with how we would prove that attempt to vote. So, Chair Freiberg, I agree with you. That might not be very clear how that was written, and so the motion I am making is to divide this.
The amendment, it appears the amendment is divisible. Representative Altendorf, the clerk will report the division of the bill into 2 separate parts. The clerk will report the bill.
Altendorf has requested that her amendment be divided. The first portion would be on lines 2 through line 6. The second portion would be lines 7 through line 15. And we'd be voting on the first portion first.
We'll be voting on the first portion first. Any discussion? Representative Altendorf.
Sorry, Madam Speaker, I would like to vote on the second section first.
Okay.
Representative Altendorf would like for us to vote on the second portion first. Discussion to the second portion of the amendment.
And I would also like to ask for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion on the second half of the amendment as it is split. Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Altendorf. I had a feeling this might happen. This amendment did look very divisible to me, actually, as I read it. So I made sure to talk about both halves in my remarks. Maybe you didn't quite hear the part when I spoke about the second half of it. So I'll just kind of reiterate what I said. I'll try to be a little quicker, recognizing we're a little late here. But as I said, this provision here has no standards in place. There's no way to determine no fair way to determine how a person might be suspected of not being a citizen. And I mentioned when I talked about it that it could potentially open the door to discrimination. But then beyond that, I mentioned in my remarks when it was a whole amendment that there's no means of tracking or recording who tries to register and why they're not eligible. It could be because of age, it could be because they don't have proof of an address, or it could be because they're not citizens. None of these are inherently wrong. Our election workers are trained to inform people who seek to register of the requirements for eligibility and determination. And this would require a large administrative effort to train and implement. So I would encourage members to vote no on this portion of the amendment.
Further discussion. I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's interesting because you know what? There's a really easy solution to this problem, and that is requiring an identification to be able to vote. If you just have to show an ID to vote, then it's really easy to determine if someone is eligible, and we don't have to worry about if they are suspected of not being a United States citizen, because they will have an ID that says that they are a United States citizen and eligible to vote, because as it turns out, you need that. I think that this amendment from Representative Altendorf actually was crafted very carefully, because the only requirement is that if an election judge suspects that someone is not a United States citizen, and now what might lead them to suspect that? They don't show ID? And all they have to do is report that. They have to notify the county auditor or municipal clerk and ICE, the folks who are charged with enforcing whether or not people are in the United States legally. Or excuse me, if they are not a citizen attempting to vote. This is the problem that we have now. Although it's interesting, with all of the election laws that were passed last year, this should get easier and easier to distinguish, right? Everyone's automatically being registered to vote at this point at several points of entry, which actually makes it easier to flag if you suspect that someone is not eligible to vote, if they are not a United States citizen. It makes it easier to flag that, strangely. Because at that point, they have not interacted with one of the many entry points that would automatically register them to vote, that would verify that they are United States citizens and legally allowed to vote. So this really is not that complicated. This does not take significant sleuthing from a head election judge. It does not impose any penalties on a head election judge. They're not in trouble if they make mistakes here. No one's in trouble if they make mistakes, actually. This is not punitive. The only way that this would be in any way punitive is if someone was reported as being suspected of not being a United States citizen who's attempting to vote. It could be punitive if it was discovered that they are indeed not a citizen of the United States and attempting to vote. And at that point, it should be punitive. At that point, it should be punitive. So this is not complicated, folks. Don't listen to the smoke screen. Oh, we couldn't possibly. It's how would someone ever know? There's no requirements that tell us how to figure that out. It's really simple. If the head election judge suspects, all they need to do is notify. It's no more complicated than that. It's not punitive against the election judge, and it's also not punitive against the person who is suspected. It's not punitive against them either. Unless, of course, they are actually not a citizen who is attempting to vote. Then it could become punitive, which, again, is appropriate. Vote yes on the amendment.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, the problem with this provision, so this says that if somebody is suspected of not being a U.S. citizen, I think people may remember the Show Your Papers law from Arizona from 2010, kind of ringing a bell, where police, if they suspected that somebody was undocumented, then they could take certain steps. Arizona got sued. They had a settlement. I believe there was money paid, because it's not consistent with our U.S. Constitution to kind of look at somebody and get a sense that maybe because of how they look or the language they use or whatever else, that we have some sense that they might be a U.S. citizen or not a U.S. citizen. So having it be that we pass a law that is based on somebody who's suspected of not being a citizen or being one exposes us to a lawsuit and paying money, and it is not something that is consistent with the law. Let's not do it. Let's vote no. Thanks, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And for those that are concerned about the difficulty of verification, HAVA in federal law already has a verification. Minnesota has been participating in that for many years. And therefore, it's already in the process so that if somebody did not have the right to legally vote here, or there were issues with the identity, the social security, the address, etc., that's already verified under federal election law and is part of our process to begin with. So the decision that this would be hard to verify, or frankly, if you're concerned about suspected, well, HAVA law basically looks at if you do not have these core things for registration, then you're automatically having to verify through the Social Security Administration website, which is public and accessible. So therefore, it's a much less complicated issue. And in fact, that HAVA verification frequently finds during an election cycle 9,000 to 16,000 bad registrations from Minnesota elections. My interpretation is this would, if it's discovered and the cause for it being a bad registration is not being a U.S. citizen and thus cannot vote, then we'd have a penalty. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I find it really interesting. I love listening to this debate in this chamber tonight, and it's fascinating how much I think that Minnesotans would really support this. They want to know that this sort of information would be shared up the food chain. You know, there's polling information to say that this is wildly popular with the public to hear. That they really want to ensure at its very basic that only legal residents and citizens, legal citizens, are allowed to vote in our elections. This is really very clear. And in addition to that, there's data to suggest that a growing number not of Americans, but a growing number of Democrats even favor mass deportations of people who are here in our country illegally. Growing numbers suggest that. So this amendment tonight is really right in line with growing sentiment in our country. And it's important that we take up something like this. And I, for one, am not overly concerned, or I don't take my colleagues on the other side of the aisle quite for their word when they share concern about risk of lawsuits. We've spent this week, and it feels like a little bit of whiplash, because we've spent this week passing bills that had nothing to do with the supplemental budget, but had everything to do with creating more lawsuits because of the conflict that it creates with federal law. So this is, frankly, I mean, with the amount of bills that have passed during this biennium that are going to result in more lawsuits, I'm surprised you're not, excited and jumping out of your seats to vote for this amendment, because if that's the result that you think that this is going to take, then it might be a benefit to some of your friends and neighbors.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Altendorf, for this amendment. It's a real common sense amendment, and I think that maybe the suspected language could be tweaked a little bit, but I think a reasonable interpretation of it is that it's talking about a well-established standard, reasonable suspicion. If we have if law enforcement officers, if government officials have reasonable suspicion that someone is doing something illegal, they're supposed to take action. And if county auditors or the head election judge has some reason to have reasonable suspicion that an individual who is not a United States citizen has attempted to vote, I mean, that's against Minnesota law. Of course that should be reported, not only to the county auditor and the municipal clerk, but to federal immigration officials. And Representative Pinto, I appreciate the reference to Arizona versus United States. I actually do remember that case, but I did appreciate even more the idea that we in this body should be concerned about not violating federal law. It's a little odd that it's coming from that side of the aisle, because, like Representative Schultz, I am old enough, in the sense that I have been here for more than 1 week, to remember when we passed a law in which we actually put in an amendment. It was my amendment that was amended, but put in an amendment where we specifically flagged that we were concerned about whether that law was violating federal law. We have language in the transportation bill that we passed out of this chamber this week that says we are concerned about whether there's federal preemption, whether this state law we're passing violates federal law, and we need to have the Commissioner of Transportation perform a preemption analysis to determine whether or not we are violating federal law. Not only that, I am old enough to remember, in the sense that I have been in this body for 2 years, that we passed 3 bills last year that are already enjoined in federal court as violating federal law. 3 of them. And that's not counting the lawsuits that are pending against laws we passed last year, and the lawsuits that are still to come. For example, North Dakota threatening to sue us over the energy bill that we passed that violates federal law. So I do appreciate the concern coming from the other side of the aisle, at least today, about violating federal law. But I did want to reassure you, Representative Pinto, that I do also remember Arizona versus United States, which was about the law that was called the Show Me Your Papers law. And Arizona versus United States, I just want to reassure everyone, Arizona versus United States has nothing to do with this case. Arizona versus United States was a case where Arizona actually was creating their own criminal violations about the immigration law. Not saying you can't vote in Arizona if you're not a United States citizen. Of course, every state has that law, and of course, that's not preempted by federal immigration law. Every state in the United States doesn't allow prohibits non-citizens from voting and allows those states to actually enforce their law. What Arizona versus United States said was that Arizona can't have its own independent criminal violation about violations of federal immigration law because that does intrude on, according to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was a narrowly divided court, but the majority did hold that you can't have an independent criminal statute that also enforces federal immigration law. That is what the Arizona versus United States case was about. It has nothing to do with the Altendorf Amendment. The Altendorf Amendment would not be in violation of Arizona versus United States. It would simply be an enforcement mechanism of our Minnesota state law that already prohibits non-citizens from voting and would simply say, if we have reasonable suspicion that someone is violating that law, then we are going to go ahead and enforce that law. We should do that. I mean, we should, Representative Brindley, we should have voter ID. I think that's pretty obvious. It would be a lot easier to enforce this if we did have voter ID. But even in the absence of voter ID, law enforcement officials, election judges, if they have reasonable suspicion that someone is violating the law, they should do something about it. Vote for this amendment.
I recognize the member from Crow Wing, Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's make Minnesota elections great again. Because I've said this before, I said it last year. The blood of patriots wasn't spilled for us not to take our elections seriously. Elections are meant for legal, law-abiding citizens. And when someone comes here not according to our laws, that's illegal. And then when they try and go and vote in our elections, that's illegal too, according to our laws. And so, thank you, Representative Altendorf. This lines right up with the rest of our laws. Why would we not take this? This truly is a common sense amendment, as Representative Niska just graciously, as an attorney, pointed out. Okay, Representative Freiberg, come on, he did a good job. Because I can't help but notice that this language in this bill doesn't do much for election integrity. I don't see a lot of money being spent here on voter ID and proof of citizenship. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry, I'm mistaken. There's none. So let's at least get this one across the finish line. This one makes sense if you love America. This one makes sense if you love our Constitution. We should only have legal, law-abiding citizens voting in our elections. That is the truth. If you love American citizens, and you love what patriots did to pay the price for our freedom and liberty in this country, let's add a little election integrity to this bill tonight. Did you ask for a roll call vote? Oh, I'm sorry, I should have asked her to yield for a question. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's light that board up green. Let's show Minnesota that the Minnesota House of Representatives loves law-abiding citizens. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So just a couple additional points. So first of all, there was talk about photo ID, but people ineligible to vote, like Visa or green card holders, are able to get a driver's license or a photo ID and have been for a long time. So I don't understand how photo ID is relevant to this debate. Second, under our new automatic voter registration law, there's an extensive verification process in place. It determines you are who you say you are, you live where you say you are, and you are an eligible voter. I was handed this chart. This is put out by the Minnesota Secretary of State's office, describes the automatic voter registration process. The first step in the process, a Minnesotan applies for or renews a state-issued ID. It's right there at the second place. The documentation is reviewed to determine if the applicant is a U.S. citizen. If they're not, the citizenship affirming documents are not provided. They are not registered to vote. So anyway, this amendment is unnecessary. It's overly complicated. I would encourage members once again to vote no.
Members, just before we vote, reminder to the body that the Altendorf 814 amendment was divided. We are voting on the second portion of the Altendorf amendment, lines 1.7 through 1.15. The clerk will take the roll. Will the chief clerk call the names of the members voting remotely?
Carol.
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 Come back.
Keel.
Aye.
Keel, aye. Hassan. Hassan. Keeler.
Keeler, no.
Keeler, no. Cagle.
Cagle, no.
Cagle, no. Pulowski.
Pulowski, no.
Pulowski, no. Perez Vega.
Perez Vega, no.
Perez Vega, no. Walgamot.
Walgamot, no.
Walgamot, no. Carol.
Carol, no.
Carol, no. Hassan.
Hassan, no.
Hassan, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 50 yeas and 73 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. Now we're on the first portion of the divided amendment, which is line 1.1 through 1.5. To 1.6. Do you need to? Discussion on the first portion of the divided amendment. Representative Freiberg.
I won't repeat the reasons. I did explain that this is a complicated provision, so I would just encourage members to vote no on this provision as well.
I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I disagree. I don't think it's complicated at all. It's literally any individual who attempts to vote, who is not eligible to vote, is guilty of a felony. And I'll tell you why it's not complicated. It used to be slightly more complicated. But last year, Democrats passed a bill that allowed felons to vote. So they were previously ineligible to vote. Now, if you are not actively in prison and you are a citizen of our country, you are eligible to vote. That is not complicated, actually. That's not complicated at all. So if you are attempting to vote, and you are, I guess, actively in prison, but that gets pretty tricky because they're sending mail to the prison if you're trying to request an absentee ballot. That gets pretty tricky. The only way to do it is if you are attempting to vote and you are not a citizen of this country. I guess if you're underage, but boy, if that's the problem we've got, we better pass some of Dino's physics or civics, because that's not complicated either. This just is not complicated. It's not complicated at all. Now that felons get to vote in this state, even when they are on probation, even when they otherwise should be in prison, if they can vote, literally undocumented immigrants, People who are not citizens of our country? That's legal and illegal. That's both. But if you are not a citizen of our country and you attempt to vote, you are committing a crime, and you should be held accountable for that. And let's not forget that Democrats have set up election law in the state of Minnesota so that anyone can go to the polls, register that very same day at the polls. Do they need a photo ID? Nope. Do they need a utility bill? Nope. Do they need anything that even proves where they live, let alone their citizenship status? Nope, they don't need any of it. All they need is someone who is willing to go to the polls and say, yep, I'm gonna vouch for them. That's all they need. That's all they need. And then what happens, and we're the only state in the country that does this, then what happens is we immediately commingle their ballots in with everyone else's. So if it is discovered later that they were not eligible to vote, that they did not live where they said they lived, that they were not legal citizens of the United States and entitled to vote, it's too late. That ballot has already been counted. That ballot has already been counted. That is the insanity of election law in the state of Minnesota. So all this says, any individual who attempts to vote and is not eligible to vote is guilty of a felony. And they should be. This is not complicated. Vote yes.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative New Brittonley. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify my remarks. I think it's late, and I was getting the second half confused with the first half. It's not, the issue with this one is not so much that it's complicated, but it's overbroad. When you read the language, you left out the fact that it deletes the word knowingly. So, I mean, you mentioned undocumented people on probation, but this sweeps in a lot more people than that. So, when I mentioned way back, it seems like a long time ago now when we talked about the undivided amendment, but, I mentioned the example of the person who accidentally votes in the wrong precinct, which is something that happens all the time. They they were corrected, they didn't actually vote in the wrong precinct, but they did attempt to, and the requirement that it be knowingly is removed. So this would make them guilty of a felony. So it's way overbroad, and I encourage members to vote no.
I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, Representative Freiberg, the difference in this amendment is the word eligible. A person who accidentally votes in the wrong precinct is still an eligible voter. A person who's here in this country illegally or a non-citizen is not eligible to vote in our elections. This is a common sense. And the word knowingly is intentionally removed for the simple reason it's something that almost is very difficult to prove in court. If they come and vote and they're not a citizen of this state or this country, they should not be voting. They know if they're a citizen in this country or not. Members, vote for the amendment.
Further discussion? There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed, say nay. No. The motion does not prevail, and the amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Torkelson moves to amend House File Number 4411. The second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A11.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Madam Speaker, I believe this is an Olson amendment.
I recognize the member from Martin, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, Last year, the Minnesota legislature created a commission that was responsible for the creation of a new flag and a new seal to represent all 5.5 million Minnesotans. It was composed of 13 voting members and 4 non-voting members, one of which was myself and Representative Freiberg. We supposed to meet in August, beginning in August, but there was some delays. The governor had a little bit of trouble finding his people, so the 3 members that he appointed were not there presently. It took a little bit longer. We met in September, and we were tasked with creating a product by the end of December. So we had about 4 months to do this. We worked very diligently. We received some input from the public, maybe so much so that within the limited amount of time we had, we were not able to completely digest all of it. To give you all an example, the state of Utah created a new flag recently. They took 18 months to do so. We took 4 months to do so. There were some issues with time and just the ability to really listen to the people of the state of Minnesota. But I really don't care if you love the flag design. I see that some people have taken their state-issued computers and put a sticker on it, which I'm not sure if that's allowable, but they're using their state-issued computers to put a sticker on it. And that signifies to me that they do enjoy and do approve of that flag. They like it, and that's okay. Some people have lapel pins that have the new state flag, and that is okay as well. Because in my mind, I don't really care. My whole entire goal is that we let the people of Minnesota decide what identifies them. It's their right as citizens of this state to say yes or no. This new flag design, does it truly represent what I think of when I think of being a Minnesotan? Or does the old one? Or maybe it's something entirely new. Members, I've always found in life that if we want something so bad that we're willing to disenfranchise millions of people, that we maybe should reconsider the decision. All I'm asking with this amendment is that we give the people of Minnesota an opportunity to tell us what they think. And if they say that they like this new design, then great. It should be our new flag. But if they decide that they do not, in fact, approve of this flag, then we could go back to the drawing board. We could try again. We could take the old one and bring it back. All these things are within the realm of possibility. But the number one most important goal here is that the people decide. Not the 13 people who were chosen to decide, but the millions of Minnesotans who look at our flag, look at our seal, look at our blueberry muffin and find some form of representation in it. Our state symbols mean things to people. Our current flag means something to people. The new flag design means something to people. My hope is that you will allow, through the acceptance of this amendment today, the opportunity for the people to decide. Give them the right to vote here. I've always found that in a democracy, there is a way to give people the right to vote, and there is a way to take away that right. And that right was purposely taken, or maybe not purpose, maybe inadvertently taken from them. Because currently, Minnesotans do not have the right to vote on what they determine to represent them, whether the old flag, the new flag, the old seal, or the new seal. I couldn't care less as long as Minnesotans get to choose. I'm really concerned because if you look around, there is in fact precedence for multiple different options. The state of Mississippi recently held an election that determined that they wanted to change their new flag. It was overwhelming. More than 70% of Mississippians voted to change their flag. And it was one of the most unifying aspects for their state. If you go to other areas, Utah, for example, they were not provided the opportunity to vote on their flag, And now, even though there's a supermajority of conservatives in the Utah legislature, they're calling the new flag a woke flag, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But they didn't get to vote on it. And so that's the problem. The disunity that occurs when something is forced upon a population. We can avert that disunity here today by accepting this amendment, put it on the ballot, let the people decide. And I will be absolutely happy with whatever result comes out of it. Please support this amendment. Let Minnesotans choose and give them the right to vote on what represents them. Thank you, Madam Speaker and members.
I recognize the member from Blue Earth, Representative Freiberg. Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to a point of order under Mason's 3.21. Motions and propositions must be germane. The A11 amendment introduces the state flag and seal, which is not in the bill. And I'd ask you to find the amendment out of order.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to provide advice to the body, if I may.
Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My advice to the body is that it is currently 11:26, and this will not be the last time you see an amendment to allow Minnesotans the right to vote on the state flag and on the state seal. It will not be your last opportunity. So my advice to the body, should you choose to take it, is that we let them rule it out of order, say they don't want to vote on it, and we will bring this fight to the battleground next week.
I've studied the amendment, I have reviewed the bill, I've considered your advice, and I'm ruling that the point of order is well taken. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Torkelson moves to amend House File Number 4411, the second engrossment, as amended, and the amendment is coded A12.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. We have the same argument, but a new topic. The topic this time is the state office building. As we all know, this huge project really came in the dark of night, without public approval, without even public analysis. And the same arguments apply. This is a very important building on our campus here that was designed without any public input.
321, huh?
And the public deserves to express their opinion.
I didn't hear.
We now have the project started, but it's never too late to stop. In fact, as I gaze out my window of my office, I see a number of spots out there on the site where the archaeologists are hard at work trying to figure out what was underground before the project started. So it looks to me like this project is already delayed significantly by the archaeological work that's going on. So let's just take this to the voters and let them determine whether they think it's important that we spend over $700 million on the palace for politicians. Madam Speaker, I urge a green vote on the A12 amendment.
Representative Freiberg, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I again rise to point of order under Mason's 3.21. Motions and propositions must be germane. The A12 amendment introduces a new subject, and I would ask you to find it out of order.
Advice. Representative Torkelson.
Well, Madam Speaker, I would urge that you let us vote on this. We're going to vote on it one way or another, so why not just get it over with?
I'm ready to rule. I have studied the amendment. I have reviewed the bill. I have considered your advice, and I'm ruling that the point of order is well taken. There are no more amendments at the desk.
Madam Speaker, I request that we reconsider your decision, and I request a roll call.
Representative Torkelson appeals the decision of the Speaker. He's requested a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Members, the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or a green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or a red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll. The chief clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Carol.
Go ahead.
I'm not.
Carol, aye.
Carol, aye. Keel.
Go ahead.
No.
Keel, no. Hassan.
Hassan, yes.
Hassan, aye. Keeler.
Keeler, aye.
Keeler, aye. Cagle.
Cagle, aye.
Cagle, aye. Pulowski.
Pulowski, aye.
Pulowski, aye. Perez Vega.
Perez Vega, yes.
Perez Vega, aye. Wolgamott.
Wolgamott, aye.
Wolgamott, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 68 yeas and 59 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There are no more amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 4411, as amended.
Third reading. I recognize the member from Crow Wing, Representative Davis. Representative Davis is not there. I will recognize the member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. Thank you, Chair Freiberg. Yeah, you said we could get through this quickly, so we appreciate that. I just rise today as, I'll make this short and simple, but, there has been our elections, we've really lost a lot of confidence in it, and it's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democrat thing. You can go back to many elections, 2016, 2020, I know we like to throw around things and say that people are election deniers and things like that, but the fabric of our country, the fabric of our society, our confidence in our elections have been shaken. And what I would like to see moving forward is more of this bipartisan support that we can work to make sure that people have that confidence back. We saw tonight some bipartisanship when Representative Newton spoke up in a way to defend the veterans. That's what we need, members, is we need more of this so that we can build back this confidence in our elections, build back the integrity, make it easy to vote, hard to cheat. We really, really need to work together on this. And so, Chair Freiberg, I thank you for working with us on what you did tonight. I appreciate it. And thank you, everyone.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it was nice to have some, light and good conversation back and forth. Some agreement. We saw agreement on this and other things tonight, and I hope that bodes well. I'm glad that a certain component wasn't in the bill, so I had an amendment that was pulled, and so I think this is as close as I've seen for a while now to almost bipartisan, and it's somewhat refreshing. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies. Members, this is the election bill that you have been waiting for. As I sit here and look at it and what we have amended in, what I see is a bill that is where most of the policy is actually amendments that you offered. I see a policy bill, a bill that includes an amendment by Johnson that ensures that the Secretary of State continues to use Social Security Death Index. I see a policy from Representative Torkelson adding items to the campaign finance disclosures and expending effective dates. From Representative Altendorf requiring proof of residence. from my favorite, actually, and I didn't know that we could do this, but from Representative Quam, prohibiting interest on loans that candidates mix to their campaigns. Actually, in addition to that, there's great language in here from Representative Coulter that centralizes spending in local races and in school district races in the Campaign Finance Board. That is a conversation we've been having in committee all year. Other than that, what the bill does is it makes sure and it consolidates accounts to ensure that our election officials have $3 million a year in 2024 and 3.3 in 2025 and into the base. That is available to all of the cities and counties that administer elections. And it is an opportunity to, what we're doing is investing in something we did last year, which I'm really, really proud of. I think we in the Elections Committee have talked a lot about supporting local elections administration. Here in Minnesota, all of our elections are administered locally. 30,000 Minnesotans helped do that. And when we passed the voter fund last year, what it did is it put into the base, it put into statute, working with our cities and counties, a commitment to fund that vital infrastructure in our elections administration. And what this bill does, what this budget bill does, is put more money into that account. It puts more money into that account and ensures that there's $3 million available in 2024, and as I said, $3.336 million in 2025. So, members, this is a really good bill if what you care about is ensuring that our local elections administrators have what they need to get the machines they need, the security they need. We've been talking about rising issues to ensure that they have resources to pay election workers on election day. This is the bill for you. So members, I know we talk a lot about that and how we can support our local cities and counties when it comes to elections. They are doing the work, and I'd ask that you vote green to support them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker and members. As the chair said earlier, this is the last bill standing between us and the weekend. But if I'm nothing else, I'm a creature of habit, Mr. Chair, and I've gotten into the habit of staying on this floor till at least midnight every night, and it would be a shame to break that habit at this time. So I'm not sensing a lot of support for my efforts, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, and members, the best thing about this bill is actually what's not in it. Ranked choice voting was in this bill until we had a little conversation about whether it was taken out in Ways and Means, and then there was an amendment to put it back in, but it was noted behind the scenes that that was not appropriate, that it was not, it was going to be ruled out of order, and so that did not appear tonight. So that's very good news, although I expect that ranked choice voting issue will come to the floor, but it'll come to the floor on its own, as it should, and we can have a thorough debate about that at the time. We, Republican members of the Elections Committee, had three things in mind when we started our work some 15 months ago now. And the first one of those, and most important, I think, is the bipartisan work that this committee should do. Up until tonight, we really didn't do any, frankly. It was a partisan activity. Very little input was accepted from Republicans. No Republican bills were passed out of the committee. No Republican bills were heard, except one that was laid over and it disappeared last year. That's a shame. Honestly, past governors, past legislatures have really demanded that we do this work in a bipartisan fashion. And it's too bad that we couldn't do that in this biennium, at least not until this evening. I thank you for accepting a number of Republican amendments tonight. It took us 15 months to get here, but we did finally get to a point where there is some bipartisan work being done on this very small elections bill, but it is at least a small step in the right direction. Our other two priorities were to protect election security. Not much work was really done to do that. And then another priority was to increase the public's confidence in the election system, and not much work was done to do that either. A lot of work was done to expand accessibility, which isn't horrible, but doesn't increase people's confidence in this election system that we have. When the door is wide open for days for people to come in and vouch for as many voters as they, well, I realize it's limited, but for lots of voters, and we don't really have that integrity. We don't have provisional ballots that many other states have, that actually we lay aside those votes that we're not sure about, give them a chance to be proofed before they're counted. Instead, we just throw them in the pile with everyone else's and count away. That does not improve people's confidence in our election. As we know, as we watch the news, we know that all around the country, people are questioning our election systems. And ours is, I have confidence in it, but I want the public to have that same confidence. And more importantly, I want the people to have enough confidence that they are confident to go out and vote. You know, the one thing I can guarantee everyone is that if you don't vote, your vote won't be counted, right? So we want people to get out there. We want them to vote. We want them to use the tools that you provided. I don't agree with everything that you provided as far as tools for voting, but we should all use them. We should all get as many people out there voting as possible. I think that's important. But we want to verify, we would like to verify that all these voters are voting appropriately, they're voting in the right districts, et cetera, et cetera. And we haven't done much with this biennium's work to improve on that situation. However, you have taken some steps tonight to move in the right direction. This bill is very limited in scope. It does provide some funds for our local governments that you've saddled with more expenses as a result of the work of this biennium. There's some money available to help them do the work. We've delayed some of the implementation of those things so they have more time to do it right. With that, members and Madam Speaker, I'm actually going to vote for this bill. I'm not going to ask everyone else to vote for it if they don't choose to, but it's a little hard to do this, but you did take steps forward tonight to actually recognize that Republicans do have ideas, and some of them might even be good. With that, Madam Speaker, I conclude my remarks.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for those remarks, Representative Torkelson. I thanked staff when we discussed the policy bill, and I'm pretty sure they want to go home more than they want to hear their names a second time. Suffice it to say, thank you, staff. It's a good bill. Vote green.
The clerk will take the roll. The chief clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Carol.
Carol, aye.
Carol, aye. Keel.
Go ahead.
No.
Keel, no. Hassan.
Hassan, aye.
Hassan, aye. Keeler.
Keeler, aye.
Keeler, aye. Cagle.
Have a good night.
Cagle, aye.
Cagle, aye. Pulowski.
Go ahead, Jean.
Pulowski, aye.
Pulowski, aye. Perez Vega.
Perez Vega, yes.
Perez Vega, aye. Wolgamott.
Wolgamott, aye.
Wolgamott, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 83 yeas and 44 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. Messages from the Senate.
A message from the Senate. Madam Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file, herewith returned, as amended by the Senate, in which amendments to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House file number 4757, an act relating to cannabis. The message is signed Thomas S. Bodern, Secretary of the Senate. Stevenson moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House file number 4757, that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 5 members of the House, and that the House requests that a like committee be appointed by the Senate.
Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is my motion. We have a little bit more work to do.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on House file number 4757. Stevenson, Hanson J., Kozlowski, Frazier, and West.
Calendar for the day. The Chief Clerk will report the calendar for the day.
I don't have that title here. Where is it? I don't know which. House file number 5216, an act relating to state government.
Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that House File 5216 be laid on the table.
Representative Long moves that House File 5216 be laid on the table. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The motion prevails. Okay. Oh, right here it is. Motions and resolutions.
Copy of this order. Business
Do you need- But there's two of them. Did you take both of them or separate?
First one first. I haven't done that one yet.
Oh, okay.
So you say there are copies of
There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there's no objection, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objections, the motion prevails.
Long moves that House File number 5435 be recalled from the Committee on Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law and be re-referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is my motion. This is the appropriate committee, and we need to send it there.
All those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. The motion prevails. Announcements. Representative Demuth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have had a long week this week, members. We have been here a number of hours doing the work for the people of Minnesota, but I want to acknowledge and thank the front desk staff for staying with us. Madam Speaker, we know that we are only seeing a portion of the people here, that there is a lot of work going on upstairs, and you do your work as a team and with excellence for the state of Minnesota. Thank you for serving the state of Minnesota. Thank you for allowing us to do the work that takes us a long time sometimes.
Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 12 noon, Monday, May 6, 2024.
Representative Long moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 12 noon on Monday, May 6, 2024. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The motion prevails. Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Long moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The motion prevails and the House stands adjourned until 12 noon on Monday, May 6, 2024.